Welcome to the Weekly Bat.
Hello, Brian and Dietrich.
Hello.
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 Welcome to the Bat Community Podcast. Thank you both for taking the time to do this interview. So, for our listeners, last week, Brave and IPFS announced a partnership and introduced native IPFS support in the Brave desktop browser. IPFS, woo! IPFS, or InterPlanetary File System, is a peer-to-peer network and protocol designed to make the web faster, safer, and more open. With this integration, Brave is the first ever web browser to offer native IPFS support to its users, which we consider a key milestone in making the web more transparent, decentralized, and resilient. Brian Bondy, who's here today, is Chief Technical Officer and co-founder of Brave, and Dietrich Ayala is Ecosystem Lead at IPFS. But I will let the two of them properly introduce themselves. So Brian, Dietrich, can you each tell the listeners a little bit about yourselves and your backgrounds and what you do in your current roles at Brave and IPFS?
Sure, I'll start. CTO and co-founder at Brave. Been doing this for quite a while at Brave, but I manage a bunch of people. I still write a lot of code, surprisingly. I still have time for that. I was working on this integration for the past 6 months with Joss and Liu. Yeah, that's about it for me.
Awesome.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Dietrich Ayala. I actually know Brian from probably several lives ago before Brave, when he was at Mozilla. I was at Mozilla before joining Protocol Labs for over a decade, working on Firefox, related projects, doing DevRel and other things. I really got interested in a project that me and a colleague did on the side called libdweb, which was a set of extension APIs to allow people to build truly decentralized and distributed applications in the browser, and really decided to tug on that thread a little more, left Mozilla and joined Protocol Labs almost 2 years ago. Been working on the IPFS project ever since, and working with Brian over this last 6 months on this deeper Brave integration.
Very cool. So you both worked at Mozilla previously. Did you know each other from, well, you kind of did say you know each other from back in the day. Is that how the idea for this collaboration first came up or was inspired? Because you had that link?
I don't think that's how it came up, but yeah, we did know each other. Yeah, I think the first meeting, I was just doing a search in my email, and the first email to set up a meeting was from 2018 in April. And then it wasn't for a year after that where Lydell and I had set up meetings every 2 weeks. And then when Dietrich started joining the calls, that's when we started to change the method that we were using to be this new way, the native integration. Before that, we had a JavaScript-based embedded node that used JS IPFS, and the JS IPFS was pretty cool proof of concept, but it wasn't as feature-rich enough. So
I think that the initial integrations or attempts from the IPFS side were back in the Muon days of Brave, so quite a while ago.
Yeah, I remember that, and how it would come up when I would speak to people at conferences, even back in those days.
Yeah. Like we've tweeted about it before, like the different stages as we add different support for things, and it always seems to get some good speed, but nothing like this time. I think that we really hit the right way to move forward this time. So
I think so too. So you mentioned that the contact timeline goes back to about 2018, but in terms of the actual work on this particular implementation, how long did that take, and who on our team worked on it, Brian? I know you did. I know that Jocelyn did on the development side. Who else besides the two of you helped this all come together?
There's a lot of people involved in different aspects, like design was involved, QA did a ton of work, some project management people are involved as well. Most of the development, was just the two of us though. And then obviously Dietrich and Lydell were instrumental in figuring out a bunch of different details.
Yeah, this mysterious Lydell person that Brian keeps referring to is actually really the reason why I ended up at Protocol Labs and working on IPFS. His name is Marcin Rataj, and when we released the prototype of libdweb, this extension API framework for Firefox, Lydell took him about 3 days to get native IPFS working on top of those APIs. And it was super exciting for us, and it kind of really proved the concept that browsers, like a truly distributed protocol inside a browser, was something that folks were really excited about. And it really spoke to a lot of people in the community and fired us up to keep working on libdweb. So ultimately, that's how I ended up here.
And that kind of leads into my next question, which is, what were the goals of this initial implementation? And why was this an important move for Brave and for IPFS?
Yeah, I mean, this is a foundational piece, I think, of what a distributed web is going to look like. It's a not an easy lift to get something that is not HTTP into a browser user agent. And to be frank, like we have to do this very, very carefully and intentionally. The user safety is the nexus and cornerstone of trust in building browsers. So for this initial integration, we really wanted to be able to expose the protocol at its in the fullest expression of itself, in its most native, which is the IPFS and IPNS schemes being handled by the user agent and being able to be resolved by a native implementation of IPFS, not having to use a remote HTTP gateway. So in that, I think we really succeeded in one, being able to ship a browser user agent that does that natively, and two, in conveying the importance of that and seeing the importance of that recognized in the audience of people that are so excited and following along.
Yeah, speaking of security too, I forgot to mention earlier, but Jan and Francois are probably two people that I should have mentioned as well, just to figure out all those different privacy aspects. They're very important for that as well.
It's always important to shout out the team members. Good work, everyone. So, okay, this is more of a question for Dietrich, but can you explain, so we already sort of covered it, but can you explain for the layperson in very simple terms, what even is InterPlanetary File System? Like, can you just explain it in one or two sentences?
Yeah. And I like to prefix, you get this question a lot, right? And one of the questions you don't hear often is, please explain HTTP to the layperson, because that's just not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I like to lead with a description of like what you said actually at the beginning. Like it really is a protocol for the distribution of content and with some characteristics that we think are really, really important for a web that is trustable and more resilient. And the way that it differs from HTTP is also a kind of a good way of explaining what it is. HTTP, when you make a request to a website using a URL that you are familiar with, such as brave.com, that URL resolves to a specific location, often a computer or a set of computers that respond with that information, what the browser needs to be able to render the website. In IPFS, you request things by their identity, by the identity of the content itself. It has some cryptographic verifiability built into the protocol, which means that you can then get that content from anywhere. So whereas HTTP, you are delegating trust to what's at the other end of that .com. With IPFS, you get trust by knowing that anybody who gives you that data back, it is the data you asked for and that it has not been tampered with. Some of the things that the characteristics of not having to care about where things are anymore is that resilience that we talked about. When the person, say, next to you in the same room can return you the file that you asked for, and that you can trust that that is what you asked for, and the internet's out, that becomes really important. If the website you were trying to go to in the regular web is down, either a DDoS or the business went under, or maybe they just forgot to renew their SSL cert, this is something where IPFS, the website would still be available from anybody else who happens to be hosting it. So that type of resilience, while it doesn't seem like a killer feature, it's something that is like a death by 1,000 cuts. We hit those problems as regular web users every day in a bunch of different permutations. When you imagine this type of resilient, a web woven of this resilient fabric, you will experience that less. Businesses experience that less. Services are out less. The web itself can cooperate to be more responsive and performant.
So on that note, can you name any concrete examples of some of the things you just mentioned, or perhaps name some practical applications of IPFS technology that can really help illustrate what you're talking about for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest examples that we point out is our Wikipedia mirror. So we made take Wikipedia and we put it on IPFS, and there's a lot of places in the world where, oddly and surprising to folks like in the States, often the most, a lot of the people I work with and live with and a part of my life, these websites aren't available. So Turkey banned Wikipedia for a very long time. There are a bunch of other countries that ban all or parts of it. I lived in Thailand. My wife was doing human rights work there in 2010 and 11. And there, different parts of Wikipedia were down at different parts of the day or different parts of the week. And, for some of us, we're looking at Wikipedia to do homework or whatever, but for a lot of the world, this is critical information. It's access to that information is critical public infrastructure. So access to that website is really important. And so that's one of like the hallmark examples that it's something where Wikipedia, even though a lot of people take it for granted, is a big part of a lot of the world's day. And making sure that stays up and available is something that we will probably chronically undervalue.
Yeah.
But for us, it's really a core part of our mission. I think aside from that, there's a lot of things that like local collaboration that we don't take advantage of. Right now we might work on Google Docs together, but we have to go through a Google and a remote website to be able to do that. With protocols like IPFS, that's something that you and I could do over the local network. And that data, that information that we're exchanging with each other as we collaborate, work, or share on something never has to leave the local network. So there are new network architectures in terms of how humans interact with each other that are possible with these types of protocols that we really haven't got there with HTTP due to some of the built-in trust and security models that maybe aren't one size fits all, don't meet all of our needs today.
Yeah, those are some really good examples. I like the Wikipedia example in particular with regards to censorship because you're right, it does play a critical role in the lives of many people. And with it now being hosted on IPFS, it's a lot more difficult to censor that content or to ban access to the website at a nationwide level, for example.
Yeah, and I think like you're talking about censorship which is one case, and that that's something that we bring up, but also the ability to access that information offline. So for a lot of the world, the information your internet connection is not as persistent and omnipresent as we have in say a large part of the US, for example. So you right now you open up Brave, you go to IPFS, Wikipedia on IPFS, your internet goes out, you can still go visit all those pages that you just visited. Like that data is still available if you enter that same address. Or you have that tab still open to that page in Wikipedia, and you hit F5 or Command R or however you refresh and reload a page, that page would still load even if your internet was down. And these are some of the things that that we appreciate. We appreciate connectivity when we have it, and we wring our hands when we don't. And it's very difficult, I think, as a value proposition to market the importance of how we fill that gap from IPFS. But it's something that we're going to, as more applications, I think, are built on top of this infrastructure and that it's more easily available in places like Brave. I think really, really quickly, we're going to wonder how we ever lived without it.
I think it's very important also for like dApps looking forward. So decentralized applications, so that means like applications built for Ethereum and using blockchain and cryptocurrencies, both for hosting the site instead of just hosting it at https:// whatever, right? You can actually host those different dApps on IPFS, and those dApps can also reference data which is stored in IPFS as well, since the data that's referenced is immutable. So you can't really reference something in a smart chain contract if what it points to is changing, right? So
yeah, it's very cool. So you just touched on this, Brian, but could you spend some more time breaking down exactly how IPFS is integrated with blockchain technology?
Yeah.
Sorry, after you, Brian.
I was just going to say, it's just, you can basically put anything you want, like a whole directory on IPFS of different content. So you can have your HTML and your JavaScript there, and it's just hosted there. And then that page can be using like Web3, which is like a JavaScript library to connect into like the Ethereum blockchain. And also, like I said as well, like you might have a Solidity contract in Ethereum that references certain data that's off of the network, because storing data inside Ethereum can be done, but it's very expensive. So you would just want to only store hash to it instead. You might also see like when you reference IPFS content, it might be a little bit scary because like IPFS : / and then like this big ID, big hash. But there's something called IPNS, which makes it a little bit easier. Not on its own, because IPNS allows immutable content. But when paired with something like DNS link, it allows you to really access IPFS content with a very easy to remember name.
Yes, we have that for the Brave Swag store right now, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So now we've got the basics of IPFS covered. We know what it does and a little bit about how it works. And we've touched on a lot of this already, but just to really lay it out since we're here, can we summarize what some of the benefits of having IPFS support directly in Brave are for users?
I think like one of the biggest advantages is just access to more content. So content that they wouldn't have available if they're using Firefox or Chrome, they have more easily available to them on Brave. Also, you can install extensions on other browsers that will like use a gateway, for example, or use a separately installed node. But then when you like share the locations that you're visiting, it changes to the gateway URL or the local host one, and not very shareable. But within Brave, you can just copy like the IPFS / whatever, paste it in another chat window, and the user could also just load that content. So really just providing more access to content, I think, is the biggest advantage.
Are there any improvements to bandwidth that come with using IPFS in Brave?
I don't think for bandwidth, but for speed, I think that there is an advantage because the content you can be accessing it from a geo distributed location that's closer to you.
I love that use case, Brian. The really people sharing things individually between each other. It's one of the things that we want to be able to do this year, and how IPFS is integrated more frictionlessly in the Brave user experience, which is right now, if you want to, share a photo or something with somebody, or even a document, you have to either upload it to a third-party service like Google Docs and share the doc that way, or you have to upload somewhere. Sometimes it's to Imager, sometimes it's to Dropbox, and with IPFS and Brave, one of the benefits of having the node running locally that way is you can add it to your local repository, copy that IPFS address, and send it to somebody, and they get it from you directly.
Nice. So to shed additional light on some of those points, in Brave right now, there are two ways to access IPFS content. The first is through a public HTTP gateway, and the second is through a local node. Could you further clarify what some of the benefits and advantages are for using the public HTTP gateway versus installing a node? And do privacy and security considerations change depending on the configuration setup that you choose?
Yeah, so you might want to use a gateway if you want to really save on bandwidth and on resource usages on your computer, and you just maybe want to access something. On the other hand, you might want to use a local node because you have that built-in trust. So your local node is guaranteed to give you the content that you're requesting. If you have a gateway, you're not actually guaranteed. Like the gateway could just be returning whatever it wants for what you request, right? So the local node gives you a little bit better protection on that front, and that it's not faked data or censored data or anything else like that. There are privacy consideration differences as well. Like if you have it configured to be a public gateway, you're sending all your requests to that public gateway as you browse through things, so that gateway could log or track you, for example. Not that the one configured in Brave does. We have that spelled out, but when you use a local node, there are also different privacy considerations to HTTP that you need to be aware of. And that's that whenever you view content, your node's actually storing that content and can then serve that content. So basically, people can see like basically what you're serving from your computer, from your IP if they wanted to, by looking into that. There are, in the future, there's, I believe the IPFS team or maybe us will be looking into Tor transport, so you can do all your communication over Tor, and then at that point, it's a lot better for privacy.
And also, I think if you're running a local node and this is important to you, you get to contribute to the overall strength of the network.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so you might have mentioned this, but what sort of burden does running the local node have on your system resources?
It's very low. I mean, and if you use IPFS enabled Brave, when you start it up, it's using 0 resources. So it's only actually when you're using it that it actually starts writing things through the Go IPFS, which it uses under the hood. But yeah, I mean, you can look in Task Manager. It's not using a lot of resources even when you're running it, though.
Okay, cool. And the data is cleared every so often, right?
There's one, I believe the default configuration that we're using, and it can be tweaked as well, but I think it's every 1 gigabyte. That's when it'll start to clear. Okay. However, you can go to clear your private data just as you normally would, clear your cache in the browser settings, and that will run a garbage collection on the node, which will get rid of all the content that it has, except for pinned content that you have.
Pinned content, just meaning like saved content?
Yeah. We haven't, like, you can interact with the node separately to pin things right now. We haven't added those features yet, but that's one of the examples of things that are coming, is being able to pin content. So that would mean that basically you're saving that to your node and you want it to always be available and never be thrown out like caches.
I've seen a lot of people asking about Chrome's IPFS companion extension. Is IPFS support in Brave compatible with that? And if so, how?
I'll take that, teacher.
Yeah, so IPFS Companion is a browser extension that adds a couple of utility features to the browser for interacting with IPFS. It does things like, it has a little add to IPFS, context menu option and things like that, allowing you to more easily add data to the network. And it also does things like detect, there are a couple different technologies that you can add to your HTTP-based website to say that there is an IPFS version of it. And it does things like auto-detecting those and gives you the option to say, load this through my local node instead of loading it through an HTTP gateway. So there are things like that that allow it to ease the IPFS experience a little bit. To some extent, it's a place where we can look to prototype features that we might want to add to browsers. Some of the things there that have worked are things we might want to do in Brave natively. It's also a place where we can experiment with features that we might want to add to the browser. So I think the option to enable IPFS Companion has been in Brave for quite some time. So listeners might be familiar with it already. For us, I think as we look down into what comes next in Brave, that might be a vector for us to be able to experiment with other things people are interested in.
Mm-hmm. And how easy or difficult is it to get set up and start using IPFS in Brave with or without the companion extension? What steps are involved and can anyone use it? Is it intuitive?
Yeah, the way that we talked about designing this was just that the first time a user tries to load an IPFS page with IPFS / some big ID, that's when we'll throw in a little info bar at the top of the page that asks them if they want to use a local node or use a gateway to resolve this. And currently we load it through the gateway and we give them that notice and let them pick for future loads how they want to do it. We might be changing that to like an interstitial page in the future, but that's I would say the main method that people install it. You can also install it through IPFS Companion. We added some APIs in Brave in the same release that IPFS Companion can use to basically be able to control and talk to the node, and also to prompt to give an indication for the user to download it. So.
Yeah, and this is all covered in a video. It's on our YouTube channel. It's called How to Use IPFS in Brave. I already know the answers to some of the questions I'm asking, but got to ask them for the listeners. So if you're interested in learning more about how to get started and how to get your configuration set up just the way you like it, be sure to check that out. So I'm curious, did you run into any major challenges or roadblocks while working together to build this out? Were there any challenges that set you back or anything interesting or notable about the experience that you want to share?
It's been pretty smooth as far as I can remember. I don't know if you can think of anything.
I think for us, some of the challenges were really about being intentional and careful about the privacy and security model. The UX around making very clear to users how this is different from HTTP, for them to be able to understand what it means to use this different protocol where they're more active participants in creating and sharing the web as opposed to only passively consuming it. It's really important to us that users understand what that means for them. And as we start to build out more features and work with Brave to do that, we do that with care and consideration and an understanding of how these technologies work. I think from a security model standpoint, there's some pretty hard questions too around how do we align the capability model of IPFS with the HTTP capability model and the origin security model. So there's some tricky bits that we had to answer there that just kind of took some time to disentangle, figure out what the right the user safety first way that HTTP is very careful when it comes to origin security model and deciding what capabilities websites get. We had to figure out, well, how does that map to an IPFS address? How does that address fit into the origin security model? How do we apply that model in a way that reduces the surface area for user information to bleed across different origins or different addresses? So some of those questions were pretty challenging, but also I think that's some of the harder work to figure out to make sure that we can do a distributed web moving forward.
And what are some of the? Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say one thing that really helped us as well is just even within like about a month into the implementation of the 6-month implementation, we had things starting to land. So if you went to like Chrome://flags, you could turn on the IPFS experimental support, and we could really just play with things as it was being developed, and we could keep landing things that was just so we wouldn't have this like mega thing to land all at once. So I think that really helped in delivering it as well.
Yeah, I think that's something that Brave does well in general. Is that it ships things in pieces or as they land, I should say, allowing users to test at every stage. What will end up being a rather complex implementation is a great way to get user feedback and to make sure that what you're shipping remains in line with what the end user or consumer actually wants or would potentially want out of their product. So what are some of the broader implications of this partnership for the decentralized web?
For me, I think one of the interesting aspects of this work is not really for the decentralized web as much as for the regular web. I think a lot of folks are watching, and it was interesting to see the reaction from people that work in web standards, people that work at other browser vendors, people that have really invested in the web as a platform and want to see it evolve and move forward. This was a pretty significant step in terms of innovation on the web, and that was one of the kind of resounding reactions that I saw in the web platform and kind of browser web standards community, which was people were excited to see innovation, to see real innovation in the fundamental aspects of what makes the web the web. There's been a lot of innovation in rendering technologies. With CSS Grid, we finally fixed layout on the web and Flexbox and things like that. But there hasn't been a big movement in decades in terms of really moving things like a security model and privacy model forward in ways that are contextual to user needs, that aren't the one size fits all intersection of HTTP, DNS, and SSL that we have today. This is one way of kind of changing the power distribution between publishers and end users, I think. And I think it's scary to a lot of people and it's super exciting to a lot of people. I think it's a big move.
I just have another one for you, Dietrich. What's behind the name InterPlanetary File System?
I think originally, like, I think my understanding of it is that it really is a test of the concept, right? We want at Protocol Labs to think in terms of very long time frames. How do we design information infrastructure on the internet at the 20, 30, 50 year time frame? How do we anticipate what our needs are going to be? Of course, we can't foretell the future perfectly, but maybe we can anticipate what some of the characteristics of the technologies we need for things like interplanetary communication to work, what those might be. That naming IPFS that really forces that question to the fore. What are the characteristics of a protocol for the internet that would work for interplanetary communication, for resilience of data, for ubiquitous availability, for security and privacy in a way that overlays the strata of content deployment and distribution. Something that's resilient against things fundamentally changing kind of underneath and around it. Websites go up and down, companies come and go. The things that we rely on today might not be here tomorrow. So how can we design internet infrastructure around that?
Well put. Switching gears a little bit, Brian, is Bat and Brave considering any integrations with Filecoin? This came up during the AMA, and I've seen it pop up in YouTube comments beneath the videos, and people are excited by the potential of there being some kind of financial incentive.
Yeah, so the goal of this integration was really from the start just to create the base of where we would go from here. And I think that's exactly what we did. From here, I mean, we're definitely starting to talk about Filecoin and BAT and different use cases that are around those two cryptocurrencies and how we can take advantage of it. Just one example is for users being able to publish their own content. We talked about to be able to publish on a different gateway so that it's always there, even if your local node, if you're using a laptop and you close your laptop, you might still want your content to be there. So being able to publish your content on different gateways and possibly using BAT or Filecoin to pay, that's just one example of a possible use case for this, but there's others as well.
Can you talk about any other upcoming plans for Brave and IPFS?
Yeah, so we're already adding support on Android right now. So the current support is on desktop only. So on Android first is going to be a gateway only option. That's kind of just like a stepping stone to being able to do like a full node method as well. Other than that, DNS link is another thing, giving users the ability to publish their own content or fork their content that they're viewing on IPFS. It's another pretty cool thing. I think you can look at Beaker Browser for different innovations. They're not IPFS based. I think they're DAT based, but there's a lot of different innovations there. And things like I had mentioned before, addressing content in easier to remember ways. So ENS support, unstoppable domain support, handshake support. Those are all things that we're looking into as well. You can also go to GitHub/Brave/Brave-browser, click on projects, and then click on IPFS, and you can see a big board of dozens of issues of things that we're looking into and working on. You can kind of see as things move from the backlog to in progress to completed as well if you watch it over time.
That's amazing. Sounds like there's already a long list of improvements and additions to come. And this is a bit of a noob question, but is there like a directory of IPFS addresses that people can access if they want to start exploring with IPFS?
Yeah, there's a couple of places I like. There's actually and of course it is Reddit, so YMMV. There's an IPFS hashes subreddit where people post some interesting stuff. Okay. If you just search IPFS search engine, there are a couple of sites that index the CIDs that are floating around. And like, I think I searched Brave on IPSC, I think it was one of the IPFS search engines. And the first thing that came up was the swag store. So the system works. That was great. But there's not really a standard yet or a really big first mover in terms of a search engine for the distributed web. I think we're starting to see some of the pieces for that be able to fall into place now. The graph is a project that I think is fascinating, indexing a bunch of different chains they're interested in doing. And I think that with IPFS, you don't need to have a chain to index it. You can see the things that are unencrypted that are moving around on the DHT. And we talked a little bit about the privacy implications of that, but also when it comes to critical public data you really want to be public accessible and available, it's not too hard actually to trawl that source of published information. So I'm hoping that the increased availability of IPFS at the edges in the user's hands, like in Brave, we'll see more indexing sites pop up and be able to see a curated experience for the things that you want to see on the distributed web.
That's something I look forward to. Personally, and this is for both of you, of course, what are some of your favorite examples of websites or dApps that currently use IPFS? Apart from the swag store, of course.
Yeah, there's one called, after you, Brian.
Go ahead. No, you go.
I dropped a couple in the thread in the AMA. One of my favorites, I'm really excited about Vault 74 as a collaboration space for people to be able to chat and do calls and stuff like that over IPFS. There's an application that's similar to Notion called AnyType that is a productivity tool that's built on IPFS that I think is opening to beta testing sooner. I think they already are for some folks. That's been pretty cool. And then there's a project called Bertie, which is a French group that is building basically similar to Signal app on top of IPFS. That's really neat. And I think they're doing some interesting work around things like Bluetooth and Tor transport work over IPFS that we're very, very interested in. So those are some of the examples of things that I'm really looking forward to or that we'd look at today. There's also, you can go to, I don't have I think it's IPNS PeerPad. I should drop this in the AIM actually in that thread too, which is kind of like Etherpad or HackMD built on top of IPFS that great for text collaboration.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. If you have some of those addresses, I can drop them into the description box so that listeners can pay a visit too. Yeah, Brian, I'd love to hear your responses as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like just being able to publish my own content and then accessing it as well, which is pretty cool. But one thing is Origin Protocol. I hope not stealing your thunder and mentioning it.
No,
but
it's okay.
Yeah, just it's a full e-commerce solution, and it can be hosted completely on IPFS and just using Ethereum and dApps in the backend, and has no database otherwise, and has no server. So it's pretty cool that you can actually have like a full store hosted like that.
Exactly. And, a little plug for the swag store. If you update your Brave browser right now, I think the latest version is 1.19.88. You can actually visit the swag store via not sure what the correct terminology is, the IPNS:/store.brave.com will take you to it. And if you want nothing to do with IPFS, though hopefully you do, you can also just visit store.brave.com and access it the regular way. So I know we're over time, but just to tie everything together nicely, what excites you most about technologies like IPFS becoming more mainstream? And what do you view this as meaning for Brave and for IPFS?
Yeah, I think I mentioned before, but just having more content available and just being able to innovate in ways and just having the space here now, it excites me a lot that we can build off of it. And blockchains are not like a temporary thing. They're going to be here in the future. And I think as that develops more and more, I think having the support and building off the support is extremely important. So
yeah, for me, I think the reaction to this early integration, that's really just the baseline functionality is what we did in Brave this time. And there's so much space in which to grow there. And I'm super excited to see what people build now that they have these capabilities.
So you both are successful engineers at this point. What advice, this is not this is not related, but what advice would you give to someone wanting to follow a similar career path?
I'd say just hack on things. It's the number one way to really, you can read as much as you want, but if you're not actually using those skills, you're not going to get too far, I don't think. So just either contribute to open source or just create a project of your own and just hack on things. If you can't think of something, just try making a game, for example. Just diving in and getting experience is really the way to go.
Yeah.
I'd second that. Scratch that itch. There's something you want to make, follow that instinct. Try to figure out how to do it. One of the advice that I give folks, I guess I've spoken at a couple different universities around open source and getting involved in technology. Yeah. And the advice I give is always boils down to, don't be afraid to write bad code and put it out there. My first open source project was, I think, 2000 on SourceForge. And I learned so much by all of the problems that were reported to me in the issues in that open source code repository. That was a huge learning moment. And I think just sitting on my own, trying to work, not in the open, would not have gotten me nearly as far as fast. Great. Write bad code, share it with everybody.
Share your work with everybody, learn by doing, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, dive in there and be open to receiving feedback. I think those are great bits of wisdom for anyone wanting to go into any field, really. Brian, this is a question for you, just based on some things you said during the AMA. I saw that you wrote that you grew up on a farm, which I didn't know. And I guess I'm just wondering if you think growing up on a farm had any bearing on your conceptions of work and your work ethic.
Yeah, so working on a farm is a lot of work. It was a gardening farm. It wasn't like an animal farm. But like cool. I'm used to getting up at like 6 a.m. and working until 6 p.m, and then sometimes going back to work after dinner. So and doing that not only 5 days a week but also on Saturdays. So I think it definitely helps with work ethic. But it also makes you realize that it made me at least realize that it's not something I want to do in the future. So it gives me that much more inspiration to get into different things than just doing what I was doing.
Yeah, software is a totally different direction. Yeah, I can see how that sort of shaped your work ethic because, yes, you work a lot and very hard, and it's really humbling to see. But yeah, that's good insight. Thank you very much for sharing it. For both of you, just closing question, what are some of your passions or things that you like to do outside of work on your spare time? People always love learning more about our participants. So what are your passions?
Yeah, I really like to spend time outside. And I think, that's one with COVID that's been challenging. So really my wife and I have moved around a lot during COVID just for unrelated circumstances, but we went to Colorado and hiked some 14ers and really tried to spend as much time as we can when I'm not working, being in nature. And now that we're in Florida, got some stand-up paddleboards and have been paddling amongst the alligators in the beautiful swamps of Weeki Wachee.
That sounds wonderful. It's so head clearing being in nature and spending time outdoors. And I think especially with our type of jobs, not only are we indoors all day, but we are in front of a screen As if being sedentary and indoors all day wasn't bad enough, the perpetual simulated daylight we're getting through our screens is all very unnatural. So I'm on board with you. It's really important to make time to get outdoors. Brian, what about you? I know you like to run.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with both of you about being outside and
Yeah.
maximizing that time. That's awesome. Just family time is another thing. Just spending time with the family, doing anything from watching movies or going on a bike ride or playing in the snow.
Love that.
Whatever it is. I love travel, but obviously that's on hold right now. It's the macro situation, and as you said, running. I do that quite a bit.
Awesome. So thank you both for taking the time today. This has been awesome. I think we gave the listeners a nice intro to IPFS and how it works in Brave. And I hope that we've piqued their interest and that they follow some of the links in the description box to learn more, or better yet, go and try it out for themselves. Where can folks find you on social media if they want to follow you?
For myself, just twitter.com/Brian Bondy.
Awesome.
And twitter.com/Dietrich, Dietrich.
Everybody, be sure to check out the other video on this channel called How to Use IPFS in Brave if you want to learn more. And in addition, on brave.com/blog, you can read our official partnership announcement titled Brave Integrates IPFS, I believe it is. And then Brian Bondy also wrote a technical overview of IPFS in Brave titled IPFS Support in Brave. Those links will be in the description, and we'll also include links to IPFS's announcement and blog posts on the partnership there as well. So yes, this has been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to all of the amazing things that Brave and IPFS will continue to accomplish together.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Cheers. Bye.
Yep.